what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, February 8th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting long, slow, glide down to Powha on a Friday, and another weekend of utter and complete insanity, courtesy of Sodom on the Potomac. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's a very, very busy news day. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, his hand hovering over the telephone, ready to swoop on down and grab it, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Now, as of right now, the appeals court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco, is saying they will not be issuing a decision today on lifting the temporary stay on President Trump's travel moratorium. And it's kind of weird. Last night, after arguments ended, they were saying decision any second, decision any second. I got up this morning, decision any second. Now they're saying won't happen at all. Now, Title 8 is pretty cut and dried. There's no wiggle room in there. There's no gray area in there. If the appeals court is taking this long, then what they're doing is they're trying to find some way to get around Trump's legal authority, some justification. And it's going to be very, very difficult. They can't claim the ban is unconstitutional because the Constitution is binding on legal citizens and legal residents only. But obviously that's what they're trying to do, or it wouldn't take this long. Now, Judge Jeanine Pirro is saying what we already know. Trump's travel moratorium is legal under federal law. Why is this even in court? Well, because the elite establishment is looking for anything they can do to diminish Donald Trump, to overturn him, to block him, to delay what's going on. Right now, the confirmation process for Trump's cabinet has gone on longer than pretty much any other president in the history of the nation here. And the double standards and biases are fully on display because the Inspector General, the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General, is heading this probe into Trump's travel moratorium, John Roth. But this is the same John Roth. He was appointed by Obama, who basically allowed Obama to defy court rulings against illegal amnesty. Just look the other way. But Trump comes on in and tries to get this insanity under control, and, oh, we've got to have an investigation, we've got to do this. They're all still fully on board with this New World Order, global government, blur everybody together program here. And if you look at the fuss in the corporate media about this, they're acting like Donald Trump is the first president to actually use the Title 8 provisions regarding banning certain classes of illegal immigrants in the 65-year history of the law, and that is simply not true. Ronald Reagan invoked it 5 times, George Herbert Walker Bush a single time, Bill Clinton invoked it 12 times, George W. Bush invoked it 6 times, and President Barack Obama invoked it 19 times. An all-time record. So every single American president since Reagan has used this authority to say certain classes of immigrants are banned from entering our country. And look what a big stink they're making about it over Donald Trump. And again, they're still out there trying to say, oh, it's a Muslim ban, it's a Muslim ban, it's a Muslim ban. No, it is nothing of the sort. It is a list of countries, and by the way, the list of countries were put together by George W. Bush and Barack Obama's State Departments as sources of terror. And it's simply saying, if you're coming from these countries, there's a moratorium on your coming here until we can get some vetting going. It's got nothing to do with being Muslim. If you are a Pastafarian in one of these countries, you're still going to have trouble getting into the United States of America. It is not based on religious discrimination. Now then, over at the Tourism Suppression Agency, there's some newly released documents that are basically acknowledging TSA's behavior screening program isn't working. It isn't effective. It isn't actually finding terrorists. And that the TSA's program was basically the TSA workers are trained to do things to make you uncomfortable, like they weren't already doing that, to provoke you, to look at your reaction, to see if you react a certain way, oh, you might be a terrorist suspect. And, of course, the TSA itself has been terrorizing travelers for years. You're not going to get an honest reaction even from lily-white, perfectly innocent people because they're cowed down. And now, apparently, the TSA is saying, well, there's really not anything that seems to be working here. There's no basis in science. It's little more than a racial profiling program, and that's what it is. Now then, getting on over to those riots at Berkeley, and the situation is starting to really start to come unglued. Apparently, some of these dressed-up provocateurs, the ones with the facial covering and everything, were caught on tape, and it is very, very clear these outside agitators were the ones who took a peaceful protest and turned it violent. They're agent provocateurs. And they were wearing hoodies because they knew they did not want to be recognized. Who were they? Not sure. But remember back at the G20 when the police were caught dressing up as violent protesters and kicked things off into a riot there? Did the same thing up in Canada. Those could have been police officers inside those outfits. Now, Berkeley is not distinguishing itself academically right now because apparently the Berkeley newspaper, the Daily Californian, is actually taking the editorial position of praising these riots to shut down Milo Yiannopoulos' speech. And basically saying, yeah, it's now okay to use violence to silence your opposition. This is a far cry from the Berkeley of the 1960s, where everybody said everybody has an equal right to freedom of speech, and now it's completely the reverse. Now, the organizer of the UC Berkeley riot is already out there saying, no regrets whatsoever, we're going to plan more violent actions until we get what we want. To heck with democracy, to heck with the elections, to heck with any of that stuff. We want what we want, and we're going to be violent until we get it. This is from Yvette Filarca, who's with the group By Any Means Necessary. And maybe they will, maybe they won't, because the FBI has now opened an investigation into these black bloc terrorists seen at the riots. And it is not just Berkeley. Apparently over at the University of Central Florida, there's a group that's formed called the Knights for Socialism. Commies, in other words. And they're actually teaching students how to fight physically. And they're calling it Bash the Fash. In other words, anybody declared to be a fascist is going to be beaten up. That's what they're teaching these kids to do. And they're out there with the usual lies about Donald Trump. And by the way, this program specifically says Republicans are not allowed. We don't want Republicans here. There's a discrimination case right there. Women are encouraged to join because President Trump is a sexual predator and a rapist who's normalized sexual assault. Right out of the Hillary Clinton campaign, no foundation for it whatsoever. And they're out there saying sexual violence against women is going to skyrocket in the next 12 months. And it well might, but it's not coming from Trump. It's coming from the refugees and the migrants. Because it's been happening all over Europe. An even more alarming article is coming from gatesofvienna.net. What happens when Antifas acquire automatic weapons? And it's basically talking about this Antifas, the anti-fascists, are basically out there. They're well-funded. Somebody's paying for all the buses to take these people around the country and cause all of these problems. What happens when their financial backers decide to escalate and start buying up automatic weapons from the drug cartels, who've been getting them from Fast and Furious, and start handing these to these black masked thugs? Which raises an interesting question here. We know that Soros is talking about a color revolution, even as the U.S. government is talking about war with Russia, China, and Iran. How does the U.S. government expect to handle both a civil war and a world war at the same time? I don't think it's ever been tried, and for a very good reason, it will not possibly work. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Another alarming story out of IntelliHub. The U.S. Army is now training for urban warfare in the large cities. dealing with mass migration, disaster, and inner city turmoil. In other words, they're already training for a possible civil war. They're all insane out there. Maybe Donald Trump was perfectly okay when he won the election, but there's something about Washington, D.C. Maybe it's the water, that everybody's on prescription antidepressants. And they just go crazy in there. Now, over in Portland, Oregon, there is something going on that goes back to a comment I made earlier about how any color revolution that fails to capture the support and sympathy of the general population is doomed to fail. That's what happened in Iran in 2009. And it's starting to happen here. We've seen these videos of the police taking down these violent protesters, and the locals are cheering and clapping. And so there's this article from Investment Watchdog about how the citizens in Portland, Oregon are turning on these anti-Trump protesters. They're not as supportive as they used to be. They're losing the war for popular support for their agenda. And that means their color revolution cannot work. All it can do is cause a lot of damage, kill and injure a lot of people, and that's it. They're not going to get where they want to go. It's going to fall apart the same way Iran did in 2009. Now, why are these people so crazy out there? We've been talking a long, long time about the nasty side effects of prescription antidepressants, how they result in poor impulse control. You can give in to feelings of violence. And as it turns out, the National Alliance on Mental Illness has come out with a very alarming statistic. More than 25% of college students have been diagnosed and treated by a professional for a mental health condition within the past year. Now, these days, of course, mental health professionals think everything's a mental illness. What do? They prescribe pills. What do the pills do? Well, go over to ssristories.org, and you will see these medications are very, very dangerous, and they can lead to extreme violence, suicide, bizarre behavior, and it isn't just the newsworthy ones, like the mass shooters, who are inevitably either juiced up on or even more dangerous, withdrawing from these medications. It's other things as well. We did a correlation showing that as these prescription antidepressants gained market share in the United States, the per capita incidence of domestic violence tracked right alongside it. We're seeing more road rage, we're seeing more bar fights, we're seeing more police brutality, and the police are using more of these things than the college students are. We may be drugging our entire population into a national insanity that is going to be, already is, self-destructive in the extreme. Now, the organizers of the Women's March, We Hate Donald Trump, and we wouldn't even let the pro-life women join us, are planning a new operation, a general strike. Apparently some of them actually read Lysistrata from Aristophanes while they were there in their college, and saying basically they're going to have a general strike called the Day Without a Woman. And so all you guys start planning the man cave party right now, because you're going to have an entire day to just be a guy with your other guys. That'll be a little bit of fun. Hillary Clinton is now out there with a new video to the organizers of the Makers Women Conference and the protest, and basically saying all women everywhere should resist Donald Trump. I think there's some violations of the law there. Now, Hillary herself is probably in a panic. It's looking like Sessions is going to be confirmed, despite a lot of grandstanding. And with Trump in the White House and Sessions as AG and Comey wanting to resurrect his reputation or resuscitate his reputation, there's a lot of crimes there that need to be looked after. There's still some cover-up going on. A big problem for Donald Trump and for Comey and also for Sessions are all these holdovers coming in from the Obama administration, who are already causing as much of a ruckus as they can, and they all need to be replaced as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, there are very strict procedures regarding letting somebody go in the federal government. Once you're in for life, and it's a big headache for supervisors who've got employees who are not performing or are opposing them. There's a big to-do to try and get somebody removed from their job. It's not like Donald Trump's The Apprentice, where you can say you're fired and it sticks. Now, Judicial Watch, of course, is trying to obtain copies of Hillary Clinton's State Department memos that were backed up on what is called the Datto device. And they have subpoenaed for these records, which have not been turned over yet. The FBI has actually gone into court and said they have found 35 records that concern this Datto device, but it will take up to 2 years to release these 35 records. 35 records, 2 years. Think about it. Somebody does not want what is in there to be made public in the immediate future. 2 years from now, everybody will have forgotten about the email server scandal, they think. Now, yesterday we were talking about Maxine Waters and the huge gap that she made where she's talking about how can Donald Trump be friends with Putin, and Putin is supplying the bombs, and she couldn't even remember the name of the city, Aleppo. Then she went on to say, you know, how can he have his arms around Putin when Putin continues to invade into Korea? Well, she's been one up now by Nancy Pelosi, who during a press conference on Monday came on out saying that she's seen nothing she can work with President Bush on. In other words, Nancy Pelosi thinks George W. Bush is still the president. So tell me I'm wrong to be asking whether Washington, D.C. is taking too many prescription antidepressants and other psychiatric medication. Or maybe Pelosi is just flat out senile, which begs the question, why would anybody vote for her? Now, Pelosi herself may be in a little bit of trouble because Judicial Watch has uncovered documentation showing that Nancy Pelosi used Air Force aircraft for her family in 2010 for personal business. Her family is not on her staff, or at least most of them aren't. And this cost the taxpayers over $2 million. Now, in the past, when somebody in the government is caught using government property for personal use, they are required to reimburse the Treasury. So we're talking $2 million. And even for Nancy Pelosi, that's a big chunk of change. And she should be held to account. Now, as you know, the Senate is debating the confirmation of Senator Sessions as the new Attorney General, and the Democrats are absolutely in a panic that this guy might actually do the job of being an Attorney General. He's not another Loretta Lynch, going to sit there protecting the criminals in high places. And so Elizabeth Warren got on up there and started making a ruckus. And at one point, McConnell basically pointed out that she was in violation of Rule 19 of the Senate. Now, there are very strict rules in the Senate, because in the early days, things would get out of hand. We've been seeing all these videos about legislatures in other countries getting into fistfights and brawls and so forth. There are very strict rules against that, going back to when one senator used his walking stick to beat another senator unconscious back in the 1800s at some point. So they have very strict rules, and Rule 19 is you're not allowed to insult the character of another senator on the floor, and that's what Warren was doing. And he kept telling her, stop doing it. She kept on pushing. And finally, they voted through a ruling. Warren was out of order and silenced her. The Democrats came back with a measure to restore Warren's speaking privileges. That one was defeated as well. But this kind of game playing on the floor of the Senate betrays an intense fear that to some extent the rule of law might actually reappear in Washington, D.C. And when you think of all the criminals tangled up with that CIA gun and drug running operation 35 years ago, there's a lot of very, very nervous people. And they don't want to see the rule of law return for them. For you, yes. But for them, no. They're above the law. They're politicians. They're CIA. They're supposed to be immune. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about Elizabeth Warren was silenced on the floor of the Senate for violating Rule 19 of the Senate, which is you do not call your fellow senators bad names. You do not impugn their character. And she persisted, and she was silenced. The Democrats tried to fight back. That went down to defeat. Elizabeth Warren is actually on the short list of the DNC for a possible run at the White House in 2020. But she may be fighting an uphill battle, not for the same reasons that Hillary did, completely different scale. But a lot of people are starting to look at Elizabeth Warren's consumer agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where the people there are actually paid more than members of Congress. Warren is very, very generous with the pay to her people. And let's see, the Senate the majority and minority leaders are paid $193,000 annually. 201 of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau employees are being paid more. Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, receives almost $250,000 per year, but 54 of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau people are paid even more than that. So, now getting on to the area of draining the swamp, a good place to start would be all these lobbying corporations, all these lobby organizations, and they have huge amounts of money, and they corrupt and twist the political process for their clients. And it might be a good time to start reining them in as well and putting limits on their activity. Let's see, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, over $100 million annually in lobbying. The National Association of Realtors, about $65,000. Blue Cross, $25,000, and so forth and so on. And the issue of lobbying, it has been distorted somewhat because it's become a full-time profession, and these lobbyists are not just taking members of Congress out to meals and everything. They can arrange donations and speaking fees and so forth and literally buy the government out from the American people. And I think on that list also ought to be included AIPAC, which functions as a lobbying organization, but for some strange reason, they are exempt from the requirements placed on any lobbying organization that lobbies on behalf of a foreign government. They get special treatment here. And some of the pettiness of the liberals is really amazing to see. Apparently Nordstrom has dropped Ivanka Trump's fashion line, claiming poor performance. Trump rode to her defense. And interestingly enough, when Nordstrom announced they were dropping Ivanka Trump's product line, their stock price fell. Now, having learned nothing from Nordstrom's little whoopsie there, TJ Maxx has now sent an order out to all their stores to discard the Ivanka Trump signs and just take the merchandise and put it into the general racks mixed in with everything else. Even the mafia has a rule. You leave the family members alone. The family's off limit. Business is business. You don't go after the families. So, we're starting to see more and more efforts at online censorship. Apparently, Reddit banned a group called Red Ice, supposedly for wanting to try and identify some of these violent protesters over there in Berkeley and other places. Twitter is starting to remove core functions and is banning alt-right groups to create a liberal safe space, which is okay because I don't know about you, I don't use Twitter anymore. There are other new social media coming online. They're capturing market share because they're promising a censorship-free space. Now, interestingly enough, when we come back from this commercial break, I want to give you a quote from Thomas Jefferson about media. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, back in 1807, there was a young gentleman, John Norvell, who wanted to be a newspaper publisher, and he wrote to Thomas Jefferson for advice on how best to run a newspaper. And in reply, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "It is a melancholy truth that a suppression of the press could not more completely deprive the nation of its benefits than is done by its abandoned prostitution to falsehood. Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper, Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. So, corporate media has been a problem all along. Their job is to sway public opinion for their owners. And Jefferson understood this. And that is why when the United States was started, there were laws that limited how much media could be owned by a single individual. Obviously, back then, it was newspapers. And then as other medium came along, radio, so forth, those laws were expanded to them to preserve a diversity of opinion, to not allow a single media owner to have more influence over the public than the government itself. But starting with Operation Desert Storm, the government and the media came to an agreement. If the media would report the war in Iraq the way the government wanted it reported, rather than what was really going on, the government would allow the big media corporations to simply gobble up all the small little outfits. And that's why we only have 6 big media empires today and no diversity of opinion. I love those little videos that Conan O'Brien puts together, where they have clips from all the small network affiliates across the country reporting the exact same news story word for word for word for word for word. And he's making a very, very valid point. The bias of the corporate media is pretty obvious when you go back and you look at how the corporate media worshipped Hillary Clinton, protected her, defended her from all the accusations of her past corruptions, and then they went on the attack against Melania Trump. When you look at the difference between the way the corporate media treated Hillary and Melania, and remember, Melania wasn't even running for office, you see that there is, in fact, an institutional bias in the corporate media, and that's why more and more people are turning away from them. And Thomas Jefferson was absolutely right. It is so corrupted that even when they report the truth, nobody's going to believe them. Which brings us over to the New York Slimes. We've all heard of the New York Slimes bestsellers list. Oh, you must buy this book. It's on the bestsellers list. Well, as it turns out, the bestsellers list isn't actually based on sales data. The New York Times is admitting they just have a subjective criteria, and they were called out on it because there was a pro-life book that had sold out in 3 days at the bookstores and outsold all but 3 other titles on the entire New York Times bestseller list, and it was not listed because it was pro-life. And then the New York Times wonders why its revenues have plunged 25% in the last year. Now, we mentioned this before, but other people are commenting on it, so we're going to talk about this again. Amnesty International came out with this very inflammatory, provocative report about Syria's human slaughterhouse. And I guess pretty much everybody else had the same opinion I did. It's obviously propaganda. It's written to inflame and anger, not to present any information. It reeks of State Department propaganda against Syria, and they have no evidence to back it up. It's this year's version of Assad is gassing his own Alawite supporters with sarin gas right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors. We wouldn't lie to you. We're the government. Now, this 13,000 number that came on out, according to Amnesty International, was the high end of a very wide range that went all the way down to 5,000. They don't actually know. Somewhere between 5,000 and 13,000. The corporate media, though, came on out reporting it at least 13,000. Acting like the 13,000 number, instead of being the top of the range, was the bottom. So let's take a look at that. Let's take that 5,000 figure, and we can assume that no hangings actually occurred until 2012, giving us 4 years through 2016, which gives us 1,250 hangings a year. Now, given that they have days off, let's say that they were hanging people 200 days a year, or a little more than 6 hangings per day. And that would be 7 nooses. And it would require an enclosed truck with a 14-foot bed to haul the bodies off. And remember, the Amnesty International report was saying there were mass graves. Funny how none of that stuff ever showed up on any of the surveillance satellites. Never saw any activity to support this. This really is. They're trying again. Oh, Assad has weapons of mass destruction. No, he doesn't. He gave away all of his chemical weapons. Oh, he's gassing his own people. That proves he has chemical weapons. How many times do you have to be lied to until you understand you are being lied to? Over and over and over again. To get your money, to get your obedience, to get your children to be killed and cripples in wars of conquest, which is what's going on here. Now, in Syria, the Syrian forces have cut off the last supply line for ISIS to al-Bab. So, it's pretty much over except the mop-up. All they got to do is wait until ISIS has run out of ammunition and just move on in and clean it on up. Let's see. Turkish military captured the outskirts of, this is the same story, al-Bab again. The U.S. is now in there trying to help their pet rebels grab another chunk of Syria near al-Raqqa. And I think what's going on is the U.S. is going to try and grab so much territory and then say we're going to break Syria apart at this point, because they've been talking about balkanizing it and letting Assad have Damascus, and the part with the oil, U.S. puppet ruler will be over. Now, yesterday, the New York Slimes reported this story, that Yemen withdrew permission for the U.S. to conduct ground operations on their territory. And when they say Yemen, they're talking about the imposed puppet rulers, not the legitimate government who doesn't want any more war there. And the New York Times ran with this story, only to have the puppet rulers in Yemen say, no, we didn't do any such thing. Where are you getting all this nonsense? Now, apparently Kiev is undertaking a program of targeted assassinations inside eastern Ukraine. And a few days ago in Lugansk, Colonel Oleg Anashenko had his car blown up. And today, Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Tolstik was assassinated in a bomb blast. So Poroshenko was really trying to kick things up over there, and he's basically targeting the top commanders, a decapitation strike, which obviously would justify the Eastern Ukrainian republics doing exactly the same back. Now, here's an interesting little story. This came out of Zero Hedge. Things will get worse until the U.S. stops lying about Crimea. That's the big sticking point. The U.S. is still out there. Russia stole Crimea, Russia stole Crimea, Russia stole Crimea, bad, bad, bad Russia. Russia has to give Crimea back to the Ukraine. That isn't what happened. When Kiev fell in the U.S.-backed coup d'etat that drove Yanukovych, the legitimate elected ruler, from power and imposed the puppet ruler Poroshenko, the people of Crimea held a referendum to secede from Ukraine, which is their legal right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then they held a second referendum to request permission to merge with the Russian republics. Both referendums passed with better than 90% majority. That's what really happened. Now, the logic of the United States is they don't recognize the right of the Crimean people to hold a referendum and choose their own future. Therefore, by default, Russia stole Crimea. That's how they got to Russia stole Crimea, even though no Russian troops or weapons went in there. We're ignoring and we refuse to recognize the referendum, therefore Russia stole Crimea. That's like being at a wedding and having one of the wedding guests refuse to recognize the bride's right to marry. Therefore, by default, the groom is guilty of kidnapping and rape. That's the way they're thinking. Now, the House Armed Services Chair, Representative Mark Thornberry, is saying the United States needs missiles that can reach Iran and North Korea. Now, of course, both Iran and North Korea have released statements saying that all of their military activity is in self-defense because of all the saber rattling by the United States, which provably over the last going on 20 years has been invading or overthrowing country after country after country after country after country. You'd have to be pretty dumb to not be preparing to defend your borders against an obvious aggressor nation. But Thornberry's out there saying we need missiles that can reach Iran and North Korea. Actually, Mark, we already have missiles that can hit Iran and North Korea. It's called the Trident. It's carried on Ohio-class SSBNs, and aside from a tendency to occasionally fly the wrong way, each Trident can drop 8 50-kiloton MIRVs onto those nations. Now, what Thornberry is obviously talking about is a weapons program to supplant the Minuteman III, which has a 6,000-mile range. But I don't think we should bother wasting our money until Iran and North Korea are actually building rockets intended to reach the United States, as opposed to simply defending their own territory and territorial waters. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Matt in Colorado. Aloha, Matt. Welcome to our show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael. I wanted to kind of talk about the media and something I saw recently, and I don't know if you covered it already or not, but last night there was a town hall meeting with Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz discussing Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that?
No, I didn't see that one last night.
Okay. Well, the whole point is, why in the heck are Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz on a CNN town hall meeting? They're both members of Senate. They each have one vote. And if they want to vote on a legislative bill, they each have disagreements. They each have one vote. Okay, fine. Why is CNN putting that on national TV and they're discussing it in a town hall meeting?
Because they couldn't get Lady Gaga to show up. I mean,
right?
No, these TV news networks, they have to fill their airtime, and they're always out there saying, who can we get on that we think people are going to want to watch? And obviously both Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders were candidates for the presidency this last year, which gives them a certain degree of added gravitas over and above being members of the Senate. And so CNN has to fill the airtime. You can't have dead airtime where people turn off. You can get FCC fines and everything. And so I'm being flipped by saying Lady Gaga wouldn't show up, but, you know, they have to have somebody. And this issue of Obamacare is a very contentious one. It's been a disaster for pretty much everybody involved, including the health insurance companies that actually wrote the Affordable Care Act thinking it was going to make them insanely rich.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't even have any stake in the game in the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
It just blows my mind that CNN, they look like they were in a debate as if they were running against each other for presidential election again. And you're just like, okay, guys.
Well, I'm going to say basically that each is trying to present their position in the hope of influencing public opinion, so that CNN's viewers are going to fire off letters to their representatives and senators saying, keep Obamacare or don't keep Obamacare. Right now, the polls are showing that Americans are pretty much fed up with Obamacare, except for the people at the very lowest level of the economy who are getting their health care for free. But for everybody else, it's just been an absolute disaster. And instead of adding complexity to our medical industrial complex system, what is really needed for this country, just as important as draining the swamp, we need to simplify things. And I'm actually on board with Donald Trump saying we've got to start getting rid of some of this regulation because it's confusing. The costs of regulatory compliance are really out of control right now. And we need to get back to a system that's very simple to understand and therefore easy to use and supportive of American commerce, rather than this Gordian knot of overlapping special interests that we're all trying to stumble around in like we're a rat in a maze in college psych class.
Well, I totally agree with you on everything. I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't think that those guys should be in D.C. talking in Congress, and if someone wants to watch it on C-SPAN to influence their constituency in order to, you know, move an agenda forward to get people to write their senators or their representatives.
Well, I mean, look at the other problem here. Donald Trump has literally blacklisted CNN. Nobody from the White House and the executive branch are allowed to be interviewed on CNN, so CNN was happy to go out and find anybody that they could get to come on the show to debate the issue. And that's an important point there. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're coming up on a commercial break. We're going to let you go here. And Iran, which yesterday appeared to blink in the face of Trump's tough talk and pulled a missile off the launch pad rather than actually testing it. Iran is out there saying the new sanctions slapped on by Donald Trump are not really going to be all that much of a problem because they're still selling their oil. They're selling it for currencies other than the U.S. dollar, and they are attracting billions in new investment for their oil infrastructure from sources outside the United States of America. So they appear to be rather unfazed by the sanctions. And again, it's a repeat of what happened with the Russian sanctions. It's causing more harm to the West than to the intended target because it wasn't really thought all the way through. Now, when we come back from this next commercial break, we're going to talk about the real reason we're seeing so much saber-rattling against Iran, and it's got nothing to do with their testing of defensive medium-range missiles. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, Iran has announced that as of the end of March, they're going to be dropping use of the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking and for oil exports. And this is the real reason for all of this saber-rattling we are seeing. All the stuff about Iran's maybe going to make nuclear weapons in the future, and Iran is test-firing medium-range rockets that could fly to the moon and blow it up and cause the debris to fall down on the United States. All that's the propaganda to convince you we have to go to war with Syria. The real cause is that dropping of the dollar. And this is the reality behind all of these wars. Over the last 30 years, the United States has allowed its manufacturing to decline. We don't manufacture products to sell. Those that we do manufacture are very expensive and of poor quality. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. The only thing holding up the economic system for the money junkies is forcing the entire world to use the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking, meaning that anybody who wants to bank across borders or buy oil in the Middle East has to come to the United States, to the Federal Reserve, and borrow those dollars at interest. Or bring us cargo ships full of manufactured goods and food. That's it. That's the whole only thing holding the U.S. economy together. And more countries are moving away from that. I mean, that was the reason for going after Saddam Hussein. In 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. And Tony Blair and George W. Bush had a meeting down in Texas, and a year later they invade, claiming, oh, he's got nuclear weapons, he's got sarin gas, he's got anthrax, he's got cooties, and we've got to kill him. And they killed Saddam Hussein, and Iraq's oil is back on the world market, only for the U.S. dollar. Same thing with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Gaddafi was doing a great job for the Libyan people. They had a very high standard of living for Africa, high literacy. And then Gaddafi shuts down the private central bank, and it sets up a state bank to manage Libya's public currency as a public utility, and declares a new currency called the gold dinar. Then he turns around and says anybody wanting to buy Libya's oil had to pay for it with the gold dinar. Oh, he's a terrorist. He's doing terrible things to his people. We've got to go on in. It's a humanitarian invasion. And they go on in and they kill Gaddafi. They reimpose a private central bank. The gold dinar is shut down. Nobody knows where the gold went. That's what's driving it. All wars really are bankers' wars. And it's time for the American people to really sit down and think, are you willing to let your children be killed and crippled to make bankers richer than they already are? It's time to be facing that question, because we're on the verge of a world war. Gotta take a break for station identification. We've got a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to grab a quick phone call from Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to give you an update of what happened yesterday. I attended both meetings on the City of Board of Supervisors and the City Hall Planners meeting on the Sanctuary City topic. And I can tell you I've never been more embarrassed in all my life. Part of that, 60 speakers, all 4 making Sanctuary City out of Santa Rosa, and 3 that opposed it, and the decision was clearly made to make it a Sanctuary City well before this whole meeting. California's gone, Michael. It will be state by state, city by city, until the whole state is a sanctuary city. It is nothing more than Mexico's backyard. We should probably cut our losses. The government should cut its losses and protect the other remaining 49 states from infiltration. But
well, unfortunately, California is not the only one. New York is about to declare the entire state a sanctuary city. I think from the point of view of the White House, we're looking at states that are already in a condition of rebellion because when they declare themselves a sanctuary city or sanctuary county or sanctuary state, what they're saying is we will not cooperate with the federal immigration authorities. This is open defiance of the law, and this is all being driven forward by the people who've already snuck into these areas and now form a powerful political bloc, where we have politicians who are not only openly admitting their own family members are there illegally, but they're courting the illegal vote to stay in power and gain more power, even though illegals aren't supposed to vote. The entire system is starting to come apart. And this is all George Soros thinking this is a great idea, that everybody has a right to go everywhere on planet Earth without restriction, except, of course, for his house. And it's just it's plunging the world into chaos is what it's doing, all for the vanity of one man.
I might add that before the meeting, each meeting, the Pledge of Allegiance was never said. There was no standing up, no Pledge of Allegiance, which was amazing to me. I thought that's usually the first thing you do. And then the items listed. It was quite obvious to me George Soros' funded groups were there. They were amazing. They were all dressed in red, and they had flyers and posters. They were all in place. It was amazing to see this and to realize that I have no voice anymore. And that's what happens when you leave your back door open and you allow all these people come in, these illegals to come in, and they get the masses and the numbers. Their voice is heard, and yours becomes silent. State of California's gone, Michael.
Yeah,
it's gone.
Yeah, for a wide variety of reasons here, and maybe we should let them. Maybe we should let them secede. You know, go on, get on out of here, and then we take all the illegals from the rest of the 49 states, and we fly them to California and parachute them in and say it's your problem now, and then we have Donald Trump extend his wall up along the border of California. And Oregon.
I'll tell you this, 6 months from now, you'll be receiving calls from Steve from California from another location.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. All right, we're going to be talking more about this a little bit later in the show. Thank you for the phone call. Now then, the U.S., according to Reuters, U.S. may designate Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist group. Now, this is a little bizarre because the Revolutionary Guard is an organized military force, like the Army, the Navy, and so forth. This is like declaring Russia's army a terrorist group. They're not acting like terrorists. They're acting like a military force here. But according to Reuters, the White House now sees Iran as the clearest danger to U.S. interests, and they're trying to turn up the heat. Now, if you go back to what I was saying before, Iran's dropping of the dollar is a danger to U.S. interests. And you need to go back to 2005 when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on what's really going on. And he leaked out that the U.S. agenda was to conquer all the resource-rich areas in the Middle East and force them to shackle those resources to that U.S. dollar to keep the U.S. economy propped up. And so, since then, they've added Venezuela to the list. But that's what the U.S. militarist agenda is to do, is literally hold all the world's natural resources hostage and say you will traffic in them using the currency that we will loan you at interest. That's what's driving all of this war agenda. So, all right, we're going to take another phone call. Tony in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I appreciate the other points you've made regarding Iran. They definitely make sense. And I just wanted to add one other point. I know you mentioned 2 points regarding why Trump is moving in this direction. You mentioned the art of the deal. You mentioned getting some of his people through. I think there's a third one as well too, because obviously Trump is connected to his real estate in New York. He's obviously got some Israeli connections there. But I think the big one was during the election campaign. If you notice initially, Trump was talking, bad about Marco Rubio and how Sheldon Adelson was, Marco Rubio was Sheldon Adelson's puppet. But then ultimately, I think Sheldon Adelson got behind Trump. And I think the reason Trump went along with Adelson, I don't think it was so much about money, but more because of the fact that he needed to get the rest of the GOP on his side. I think he realized he couldn't do it alone. If you noticed initially, Ted Cruz said he would never support Trump, and then ultimately he did. He ended up endorsing Trump. So I think the support he got from Adelson wasn't so much because of financial backing. I think he had more than enough financial money to fund his campaign, but I think it was more about getting more influence with the GOP and having them back up. Unfortunately, with that comes strings attached.
Yes.
And I listened to his interview with O'Reilly. Obviously, I didn't like, some of his belligerent talk with Iran. But I will say this. I might be naive and I might be absolutely wrong on this. I don't think he's actually going to pull the trigger with it. I think this is rhetoric just to satisfy some of the people that supported his campaign. I think that's all it is at this point. I don't think we should take it too far. But like I said, I might be wrong.
It's confusing and it's very alarming. But you're absolutely right. Trump is not proving to be quite as independent of his backers and supporters as we might have hoped. Of course, he's already officially declared for the 2020 campaign, so he's realizing that he can't alienate those people who made him president this year. But, of course, if we're going to clean up the election system, Trump dares not alienate the voters who actually put him in that office. And I think Trump needs to go back and learn the lesson of Hillary Clinton, which is even with huge amounts of money, because Hillary spent far more money than Trump did, even with huge amounts of money and massive election fraud. If the people aren't going to back you, you're not going to win the election, and Trump needs to remember that going toward 2020. But I think once we're through the confirmation process, we'll take a look at what's going on. And, Trump may be thinking in terms of, I don't want to see the United States economy collapse totally. Trump may feel that he's actually in a corner. Because, if we call off the wars with Iran, Russia, and China, and we allow BRICS and all these other countries to start using their own currencies, how do you save the U.S. economy? It took 30 years to lose our manufacturing. It's going to take 30 years to bring it on back. Our infrastructure is in absolute horrible disrepair. Somebody posted this funny video about how our nation's highways are now bumpier than a roller coaster over at Six Flags. And they're absolutely right. And this disastrous experiment with GMO, nobody wants our agricultural exports. In a very real way, Trump is kind of trapped into this idea of trying to militarily force dollar hegemonic domination over the rest of the world. And it's a war that we're likely to lose, especially if Soros triggers a civil war at the same time the war hawks in Congress are trying to start a world war with Russia, China, and Iran. So, we could be looking at a huge multi-pronged crash. We could be looking at the start of a whole new dark ages. It's hard to see any kind of path into the future that is not an absolute calamity.
Yeah, he might just have been the right president, but at the wrong time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I said that, I think, last week, that I'm glad Trump got into the White House, but we may have gotten in there way too late because there isn't much he can do to save us from an economic crash. And he may just be saying, well, I'm kind of stuck. I have to do what's going to prolong the United States as long as possible. And, it's a holding action. But to say that I'm disappointed is a bit of an understatement. But again, I'm going to reserve judgment until after he's out of the confirmation process and we see what's really going on. And even this
Reuters... Well, he hasn't even been in for a month, so we have to give him the benefit of the doubt as well. I think
we have to wait and see on that. But even the Reuters article said that all this talk about war on Iran is turning up the heat to get Iran to back down. And the issue really isn't the test missiles. That's just fodder for you masses to consume, to feel afraid. The real issue is getting Iran to go back to agreeing to use the U.S. dollar, at which point this whole war thing is magically going to go away, except in the minds of Songbird McCain and Lindsey Graham. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining the network. Now, very interesting story out of Zero Hedge, where China's foreign minister is responding to the ratcheting up of tensions over in that part of the world by saying that it's time for the U.S. government to brush up on the history of World War II, because the U.S. doesn't seem to know what they're talking about when it comes to the South China Sea. Of course, when you have Maxine Waters claiming that Putin is invading Korea and Nancy Pelosi thinking that George Bush is still president, there's a valid issue that everybody in Washington, D.C. is slightly deranged. But China is making a valid point. Both in the 1943 Cairo Declaration and the 1945 Potsdam Declaration, Japan was ordered to return to China all Chinese territory taken by Japan, including the Nansha Islands. They belong to China. They always have. That's why it's called the South China Sea. But again, the issue isn't really those islands. The issue is the yuan, which is becoming a very strong currency internationally. It's seen as more stable and trustworthy despite the obvious economic war against it. Same thing with the ruble. The U.S. economy will collapse unless it can get the entire world to go back to agree to conducting all business with banknotes borrowed at interest from the Federal Reserve. It's basically the same deal King George III imposed on the American colonies, ordering them to conduct all their business with banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England, which, by the way, triggered the American Revolution. Now, as you know, Israeli MPs have voted to legalize, retroactively, 4,000 settler homes in the West Bank. This is seen by critics as outright annexation and an obvious threat to the possibility of a two-state solution, which Israel was never in favor of anyway. They want it all. They want Eretz Israel, the Israel described in the Old Testament, reaching from the Nile to the Euphrates, and they don't care how many of your kids have to die to get it for them. Now, even Donald Trump, who's seen as strongly pro-Israel, is saying that this is not a good idea. And even more amazingly, Germany, which dares not say anything bad about Israel ever, is criticizing Israel, saying it undermines the idea that Israel is actually committed to peace with Palestine or the two-state solution. Even France has come on out, saying this was a very, very bad thing to do. And this may wind up in international court. Now, story coming out of Mondoweiss, an Arab rights group is reporting that online incitement by Israelis toward Arabs doubled in 2016 on social media. Name-calling, hate-mongering, encouraging violence, and so forth, doubled in 2016. Now, in Israel, there is a law that makes it a punishable offense for Arabs to incite against Israelis online, but the law is only one way. So, anyway. Now then, here's a bizarre story. And Popular Mechanics has come on out with a glowing, positively glowing report about the F-35. And they headlined it, "Beleaguered fighter jet commands skies with a 15-to-1 kill ratio." And they're reporting on what they claim are realistic battle simulations held at an airbase in Nevada. And the F-35 demolished expectations after losing just one aircraft for every 15 enemies eliminated. That is a good kill ratio, 15-to-1. And they're saying the F-35 was able to overcome radar jammers, surface-to-air anti-aircraft missiles, and mock opposition aircraft. And the F-35 avionics software was the star of the show. This from Popular Mechanics. Now, there's room to doubt, because after all the reports we have been hearing about all the troubled U.S. military systems, I find this sudden success and rehabilitation to be questionable, coming as it does right after Donald Trump expressed doubts about the cost-effectiveness of that F-35. And it has to be remembered that Popular Mechanics pushes the official government propaganda. They are regularly attacking the 9/11 Truth movement, which has nothing to do with mechanics, I might add. And so I'm not buying this one. I mean, they're talking about the visualization system that allows pilots to see around them, but as of the last report, that helmet still doesn't work. And they may just be playing make-believe with the plane. So we're going to fly up there, we're going to make believe that all these systems are working. Because the onboard cannon still doesn't work, the software hasn't been delivered. And if you go back and you look at the Pentagon Wars, which is based on a true story, it is very common for the Pentagon to rig tests to get a desired result. By the way, somebody put the entire movie of the Pentagon Wars up on YouTube. And I don't know why, but as long as it's there, we did put a link to it so you can take a look at it. And it's a very funny movie, and it is telling the true story of the Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle. Now, there's another example about this, and it has to do with the M16. Now, the M16 was developed by a company called Armalite. And its semi-automatic civilian version, the AR-15, the gun grabbers like to say AR means assault rifle. No, it means Armalite. They designed it. And it's a very good weapon. Back during Vietnam, they were trying to bring it on as the standard infantry weapon over the M14. But the Pentagon procurement people, who were all heavily invested with the company producing the M14 and the ammunition, kept insisting they wanted the M14 because it used the same ammunition as the M30 machine gun, and therefore logistics would be simpler, which didn't make that much sense at the time. And they finally agreed to have a test of the M16 in actual combat, and it was a disaster because a lot of kids got killed when those M16s were jammed. And they'd find these kids shot dead by the North Vietnamese with their guns dismantled around them in their cleaning kit, trying to clean it on out. It later emerged that the people putting together that test used the wrong propellant in the cartridges. They used a propellant known to foul gun works. And Congress was forced to investigate. And Congress said, this is clearly a superior weapon. Somebody rigged that test, and we're going to go with the M16, which is why the M16 is now a standard platform for around the world. That's how this stuff gets done. And so I don't know how they came up with this glowing report about the F-35. It certainly is not consistent with all that we've been hearing about this. But the fact that the Popular Mechanics ran this story just when Trump is saying maybe we don't need this piece of junk is highly suspicious. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, U.S. crude oil inventories have increased by 14 million barrels, according to the American Petroleum Institute. And this is driving oil prices back down. And there's a very, very simple explanation for that. We have 90 million American citizens willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. They stay home. They don't drive to work. And because they're not getting paychecks, they're not driving down to the shopping malls. They're not buying gas. Now, this heavy winter is probably going to use up some of the oil stocks, but at the moment there is a surplus, and it's driving the oil prices down, leading to what is being described by Investment Watch blog as a bloodbath in the U.S. major oil industry. And they're sinking further and further into the red. They need oil prices to be up because their profits are calculated as a percentage. It's also a problem for local governments who are collecting gasoline taxes as a percentage. The top 3 U.S. oil companies whose profits were once the envy of the energy sector are now being forced to borrow money to pay dividends or capital expenditures. That's not good. Now, we have, over the last few months, been hearing a lot of doom and gloom about China's on the verge of economic collapse, China's doing this, China's doing that. And it appears that there's a little bit of economic war going on against China, as there is against Venezuela, as there is against Russia. But China's 10-year yields on their bonds continue to rise. And on top of that, they're buying more gold. They're stocking up on gold. So is Russia stocking up on gold. Meanwhile, here in the United States, our trade deficit continues to rise, which means we are importing more products than we export. And it's at dangerously high levels. Last year, the trade deficit was $500 billion, with a T. That's more than $1 billion a day going out one way. Because nobody wants to buy our products. They certainly don't want our agriculture. And that trade deficit is a serious downforce on the value of the U.S. dollar. Because the message is going on out. If you take $1 in trade and you come to the United States, what can you get for it? Overpriced, defective products, like the F-22. GMO agriculture, which nobody wants. If you take a yuan in trade, you can go to China and trade it for manufactured electronics and a bunch of other stuff. Same thing with the ruble. You can take those currencies back to their issuing country and actually get things of value from them. The U.S. can't back up its dollar anymore with either manufactured products or agricultural produce that anybody wants to buy. That's why we're seeing this trend in the United States of simply trying to grind more money out of the American people by forcing them to buy things. You will eat GMO. You will have vaccines. You will buy things that you don't really want because we tell you to. Now, clothing store BCBG is preparing for a possible Chapter 11 filing. And as usual, they're blaming the online sales for what's going on. And this was a high-end fashion shop. They had people like Angelina Jolie and Kate Winslet and Victoria Beckham lining up and showing off their fashion, but they still couldn't make it. And this underscores something that we've been saying for a while. When all the wealth is concentrated up at the very top, there aren't enough money junkies to buy all the consumer goods to keep a consumer economy going. You can't make a successful clothing store on the basis of 6 or 7 celebrities buying your stuff. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news here. We've been talking about Sears, and it's another iconic American brand which is in serious, serious trouble. We had a terrible holiday shopping season, and Sears, some people are saying it'll be gone by the end of next year. I would not be surprised if they're gone before Christmas this year. We're seeing a story coming out of governmentslaves.info that Sears mounting debt load signals new financial stress. And that is really what's crippling everybody The debt keeps going up, and the available money supply is shrinking. And that is the kiss of death. Now, a lot of these companies that are going into bankruptcy or hovering at bankruptcy like to blame online sales as the villain. But it really isn't, and I'll tell you why. Online sales are nice, but call me a Luddite. I like to go into a store with money, get what I want right there at the moment, give them my money, go home. Everybody's happy. It's instant gratification. I don't have to wait a week or two to get whatever it is that I need. And I get to actually hold the product and verify for myself that it's built well or created well or fabricated well. And that instant gratification is a big part of the retail experience. You cannot get that online. Online sales are for people who can't find what they want at the local retail outlets. And one of the ways retail has sabotaged itself is by getting away from having a variety of products in favor of bulk buys for the discount of 2 or 3 things they think everybody should want to buy because of the heavy advertising. And that kind of erodes that, because sometimes people don't want to buy what television tells them to buy. They want their own thing. So, what's really going on here is very simple. The wealth inequality in this country is increasing. And the money is all concentrated up at the very, very top, in those money junkies. And there are not enough of them to go around to all the shopping malls and buy up all the consumer goods to keep the consumer economy going. Prior to the crash of 2008, consumer spending accounted for 60% of the U.S. economy. That was a critical part of maintaining a healthy economy. And all the offshoring and automation and the rest of it, and the general economic mismanagement following the crash of 2008, have impoverished ordinary people. And then the CEOs of these retail corporations and shopping mall owners are all scratching their heads saying, why aren't the customers coming in here anymore? Because it's very frustrating to walk through a store looking at stuff you'd like to buy, knowing that you cannot. And of course, the retailer's response to that is, well, whip out that credit card. We're trying to pay down that debt. Americans are working as hard as they can to get out of debt because they see what's coming here. Now, Intel has announced they're going to invest $7 billion in a new chip factory in Arizona. They're starting to come back from Israel to the United States of America. They're going to employ 3,000. Good. Those are going to be high-paying jobs. But again, Trump's success at bringing jobs back to the United States is not keeping up with the job losses that we're seeing. Has to be more aggressive on that. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Andy in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Hey, I keep hearing on all these news shows, especially the Sunday morning shows and stuff, about how Iran is the largest supporter of state-sponsored terrorism and stuff. Who are they terrorizing?
They're not terrorizing anybody. Actually, it's the United States that's the largest state sponsor of terror. We know that the U.S. government has been backing Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Iran just wants to mind its own business. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another nation in over 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, where they kicked out the U.S. puppet ruler, the Shah, and decided they were going to run their own country again, which is one of the reasons they're near the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list.
Well, you stole my thunder with your last statement, because I was going to say the largest state sponsor of terror is the United States. I mean, we fund Al-Qaeda, ISIS, we created these people.
Yes.
We create false flags to get into wars we're not even invited into, or to create wars that we want to get into, and we do it, like you said, they're all bankers' wars.
Yes.
And this is just absolutely pathetic, because the people, I mean, I've talked to people who say we need to blow Iran off the map, and I keep asking them why. And they have no answer to that.
No, they're just regurgitating what the corporate media has told them to believe today. And, of course, anytime I hear somebody that says, we've got to do this to Iran, my answer is, I just happen to have with me a copy of the official enlistment form for the U.S. Armed Forces. And if you will fill it out right here, I would be happy to drop it off at the recruiting office on the way home, because I drive right past them. That will usually shut them up.
Well, don't forget the parachute and their rifle, because they might find themselves a little lonely out there.
Yeah, well, that's the other one that I'll use as well. But generally, when I'm in a group, I actually do have in my little bag. I actually have hard copies of the enlistment papers for the U.S. Armed Forces. And anybody says we need to do war on here, so okay, here you are.
Hey, so do you have any more information as to how things are going with the Clinton Foundation? Is it closing down? You mentioned something about it closing down. Is it
we're hearing that it's in disarray and it's probably going to close down. Certainly all of the donations going into it have pretty much evaporated as soon as Hillary Clinton lost the election, which underscores that it was, in fact, a pay-for-play scam going on. And I can imagine that the Clintons probably want the foundation to shut down because then they can destroy a lot of the records. Because when the foundation is ongoing, there are certain requirements for record keeping. If it's basically closed down, then it's part of history, and there are certain records they have to keep, but nowhere near as comprehensive as when it's an ongoing operation. So my guess is that probably the shredders are running 24/7 over there. And they're just going to shut it down, and they'll set up a new one. They'll set up some other kind of a foundation to try and get the scam going again for Hillary's run for the White House in 2020.
So they don't have any more product to sell, is what you're saying?
At the moment, they don't have any product to sell, but Hillary's still out there. She's trying to get be the leader of the feminist revolution, where the future is female, and all those males have to be just thrown out of the hive like the bees do every spring, or rather every winter. She signed up with the Speaker Bureau to do speeches for $200,000 a pop, which is another form of political payback. When somebody writes that check for $200,000 for a speech, it's not for the speech. It's sort of a legalized way of basically doing a bribe. Remember when there were all these questions about just what Hillary had said at all these speeches she was getting all these checks for, and they said, no, we're not going to give you any transcripts. There weren't any transcripts. It was just a check. And they put speaking fee on there because bribe would have looked embarrassing.
Well, did the Trilateral Commission give her money too for going over there and speaking to them and telling them how we like to come here to get? It's always nice to come here and get our marching orders. Did they pay her too?
I don't actually know for sure, but one thing I'm pretty certain of is that Bill and Hillary Clinton don't talk to anybody for free.
That's for sure. Thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here as I guzzle my water here. Now then, speaking of the Clintons, the hedge fund of Hillary Clinton's son-in-law, Mark Mezvinsky, has shut down. And about 1 year ago, they shut down the Greek fund portion of it. And this guy had everything going for him. They had Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein as an investor. Bill and Hillary Clinton's son-in-law, and he looked like a guaranteed success. And they guessed wrong on Greece, and they generated staggering losses for the firm's main Eagle Vale Hellenic Opportunity, the Greek Recovery Fund, and basically cost a huge amount of money. And now the entire hedge fund is shut down. And you have to wonder, with all the source to political connections and money and inside information, how could this guy mess up so bad? And it may be simply that we're hearing reports to this effect that he's actually a bit of a moron. That he is a creature of his environment, put forward as this financial whiz, and just absolutely messed it up. Now then, or he may have been burying money for somebody else to avoid tax penalties. But I'm going to go with moron on this one here. Now, turning over to Europe and to the migrant situation, which is out of control. Nigel Farage is out there saying that the European Parliament is terrified of Donald Trump. Now, the European Union is fracturing badly. You have quite a few of the member nations are now saying they want to emulate Great Britain and exercise Title 50 of the European Union Charter and skedaddle and go back to running their own affairs, because the European Union has been an unmitigated disaster for them, both because of the economic predations of the European Central Bank and because of this refugee crisis. And remember, the European Union was originally sold to the people of Europe as only a free trade, free travel bloc. That was it. When the EU was first created, nobody was talking about this giant bureaucracy in Brussels that was unelected and unaccountable. That was brought in by the Treaty of Lisbon. And now they want out of a bad deal. And the European Parliament is very angry with Great Britain for the Brexit vote, and they're terrified of Donald Trump, because if Trump can make a sovereign nationalist United States work, it's only going to provide more impetus for nations to leave the EU. The main selling point of the global government is that life will be better under a global government, and the EU is actually proving exactly the opposite. The world is waking up to this globalist scam, and the globalists are in an absolute panic. Zbigniew Brzezinski describes it as the global political awakening. Of course, from his point of view, that's a bad thing. They want you all to stay asleep, just watch the football games, and, look at the cheerleaders and, read that celebrity gossip news that's in the rack at the supermarket checkout line that you think is actually important to your life. They want you to go back to being drones, zombies, whatever it is they call you here. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Nui Nui, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you as well, and back at you both.
All right.
How about a tongue? Come on.
It really isn't. It really isn't. If you want to have a tongue tangler, you got to talk about Hawaii's state fish, the huma huma nuku nuku apawa'a.
Yeah, that would do it.
Little fish about this big. Okay.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm only hearing it. So
okay.
Go figure. Anyway, in light of the aspect of regarding the oil companies and all that, and the fact that they're hurting for money because people are not traveling and so forth, because it's getting ridiculous, because they're either out of work or not really making that much and so forth, so they don't travel as much. They shot themselves in the foot years ago, and they really should take and start doing some of these ships to actually do digging of the ocean floor in the Gulf to try to retrieve those hundreds of thousands, if not trillions of thousands of gallons of oil that came from the horizon that they allowed to go ballistic or whatever, that they sunk down to the bottom of the ocean with Corexit garbage and so forth, including the water as a result. If they really want to make some money, go and uproot that. And
it's not going to work. It's not going to work because the way Corexit worked is it acts as a catalyst to reorganize the oil molecules so they're now denser than water. But it's not really oil or gas any longer. It's something else that would be very costly to try and transform back into oil and gas. So that idea is not actually going to work. I know they're trying to push forward with more fracking, which is causing all kinds of problems. They're even starting to talk about mining the methane hydrates from the continental shelves. And we're talking about something that could easily trigger mega tsunamis across the ocean if they were to start messing around with that stuff.
Is that true? But now, if people start to realize that with what's going on there in the Gulf, that as you said, it's been transmuted or whatever, and the ocean life ends up getting in contact with it, if they think they're having mutations now with the genetic engineering or genetic modification, what do they think they're going to be pulling out the ocean waters for that matter? And I can appreciate why some countries will not purchase the GMO vegetables or fruit or whatever from the U.S., and I wouldn't if I were them. I have to applaud them because, quite frankly, it's garbage.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
It's getting people acquainted with the aspect of doing slow killing themselves, and they don't even know what they're doing to themselves.
Well, the problem is we've seen such recklessness in these corporations, whether it's TEPCO pulling back on the safety systems recommendations for Fukushima Daiichi, whether it's the Minerals Management Service allowing the Deepwater Horizon to get away with not maintaining their manual blowout preventer for 4 years, or what happened at San Onofre. And we're seeing these technologies just recklessly deployed, leading to disaster. And we know that's also the case with the genetic modification, because they get the result they want, they get the saleable product, and they put it on the market, and nobody's looking for side effects. They're not interested. They figure with enough PR dollars, they can make people forget that there might be an issue. But DNA is very self-referential. That's why so much information is fit into such a tiny molecule. Is every part of it is referencing every other part. It's probably the densest form of storage possible, which is why they're actually starting to experiment with using DNA for computer memories. But when you tinker with any one part of that genome, it's going to have implications for other parts of the organism, and it's those other parts of the organism nobody's paying attention to. One benign example would be the Roundup Ready corn, where they tinkered with the corn to be resistant to glyphosate, but it turned out the stalks of the Roundup Ready corn were much harder, stiffer than the natural variety. So the corn farmers had to buy Kevlar belted tires for their tractors, or their tractor tires would be punctured by the corn stalks. Now that's relatively benign, but it does show that nobody's really paying attention to these other possible side effects of the genetic modification.
Well, you know what it is, Michael? Because greed is the bottom line. As long as they can get their greed on and get their pockets lined, they don't really give a testicle about whatever the person is going to be facing.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for the phone call. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Hungary, they have decided all asylum seekers will be detained and held in camps and not released into the general population until they're granted asylum status. And if they fail to achieve asylum status, they will be sent home. Austria is now ready to send troops to the other EU countries to block their refugees from coming into Austria. This whole refugee thing is starting to fall apart. Now, down in Australia, they've got a huge success going on there. It's over 900 days since the last migrant came to Australia. And they're giving credit to their uncompromising stop the boats policy. And if Australia can do it, why can't we? Now, as you know, this last week and then on Monday, some police officials, one of them was on the verge of retirement, so he figured, I can tell the truth, went public saying that the refugees going into Sweden are responsible for an epic increase in crime. The government was trying to say, you're just being racist, there's not a problem. The media is saying, oh, no, everything's fine. Everybody's on board with blurring everybody together. But the Swedish citizenry is not buying it. And they're now demanding there be a national conversation looking at the issue of how much crime has been brought into their countries by these migrants. And remember, when we're looking at migration, it's a filtering process. We're not getting the best of the people from those source countries. The people in those source countries who are doing well, who are living good lives, they're not going to move. They're going to stay there. Remember when Israel tried to get the Jews in Iran to emigrate to Israel? And the Iranian Jews said, no, we're happy here. We got businesses, we've got friends. One of the world's oldest continually operating synagogues is in Iran. Huge embarrassment for Israel. And the reality is that the European Union governments and the European Union's corporate media are doing a tremendous disservice to the people of Europe by trying to conceal what's going on here. Now, over in Dortmund, Germany, at the train station, a migrant approached a 17-year-old girl and basically solicited her for sex. She refused, and he broke her nose. Then a German citizen came on up trying to intervene, and the migrant knocked him out. Now, they've arrested the migrant for the assault, but this girl is going to be living with this broken nose, the remains of it, for the rest of her life. Now, a little bit of good news coming out of northern Italy, because 3 migrants approached a 16-year-old girl trying to steal her phone, not knowing she was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. And she put one of them on the ground and the other 2 fled. That'll teach them. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and it's time to face some very ugly realities and dispense with political correctness and the liberal agenda. In the last 6 years in Texas, illegals committed 600,000 crimes. That's 100,000 every year, including nearly 3,000 homicides and 8,000 sexual assaults. Those are the hard numbers. Now, over in Houston, they finally caught up with a gang of 17 Colombians who were burglarizing Houston communities. And this burglary ring apparently targeted some 120 homes. And they were finally caught up to. Now, Jackson County Sheriff Andy Louderback, who also serves on the Texas Sheriff's Association, is saying that one of the big problems the open borders is doing is bringing in the MS-13 gang members, who are bringing a degree of violence into the United States of America never seen before, with criminal gangs, including machete murders, rape, scalping. That's the reality of open borders. Now, interestingly enough, the Washington Post did report on this rather vicious crime, where this man, Mauricio Morales Caceres, basically stabbed a man to death over 89 times with a 15-inch butcher knife, and then literally tore out his liver and ate it. But you have to read on down to the very bottom of the story to find out that this gentleman also was an illegal alien. Now, here's the interesting part. If he's serving life in prison, obviously, if he is released early, he's flagged for deportation back to El Salvador, where he came from. But if El Salvador refuses him, he gets let loose on the streets of America, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling Zadvides versus Davis in 2001. From October 2008 to April 2014, Texas identified a total of 177,588 unique criminal alien defendants booked into Texas county jails. The citizens of Texas are expected to pay the costs of housing all those people. Now, there's a video we have on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Over in Riverside, California, there's a candidate for the city council, Rafael Elizalde, who's out there basically courting the illegal immigrant vote. And when some independent media journalists are trying to ask him about this, all the people around him just start shouting and going, la 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 la, so that there can't be any recordings. I mean, that really shows you just how out of control this situation is, where this guy is literally talking about winning with the illegal votes. And a little reminder for those of you who don't remember it. Under U.S. law, only legal American citizens are allowed to vote in our elections. You're not allowed to walk across the border and vote in our elections to vote yourself bread and circuses. You can't walk into Mexico and vote in their elections. Actually, if you walk into Mexico without their permission, you are going to jail. The Pennsylvania Senate has passed a bill to defund sanctuary cities within the state. There will be no more state revenues going on in there. I think that's a good step. Now, interestingly enough, there's a lot of talk about something that's going on up in Canada where they've passed, or they're considering a law that would ban criticism of Muslims the way criticism of Israel is now banned. Now, we've already seen that when you are not allowed to criticize the behavior of certain groups, those groups will persist in that behavior. There's no reason for them not to. And a lot of people are very, very concerned about Canada going along with this open borders, New World Order global agenda, and it's starting to cause a lot of friction up there. What's happening in Europe is now coming to North America, and we should be aware of that. Now, over in Great Britain, they've hit a bit of a snag. There was supposed to be an audit or a probe of Britain's foreign aid to other countries. And apparently it turned up £1.3 billion that they can't account for. And the concern is that Great Britain, like the United States, has been covertly funding groups and activities that the voters really would not be happy with. Torture, assassination, acts of terror. And that's a lot of money. £1.3 billion has gone missing without trace. Not as bad as the $6 trillion that has vanished from the Pentagon without trace. I just love it over there. It's probably just an accounting error. I mean, the money was there last week. It can't have really gone. Of course not here. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, again, back on Great Britain, there was an investigation going on by what's called the Iraq Historical Allegations Team that was investigating claims of war crimes, abuse, and torture by British troops in Iraq. And their latest report is saying that they wish to step down and allow the Army to investigate itself for possible war crimes in Iraq, from which we may deduce that the Iraq Historical Allegations Team found some stuff that was very unpleasant and that the British subjects would not be happy with, and so they're going to allow the fox to guard the hen house, as it were here. Now let's talk a little bit about education, because as you know, there's this hue and cry against Betsy DeVos because she supports choice in education. She is opposed to the idea of forcing everybody to go to the public schools and learn Common Core and the rest of it. And what's amazing is, in past years, you have all of these conservative parents who want to homeschool, and inevitably the liberals are saying, "Oh, you can't do that. They've got to go to the school. They've got to be indoctrinated. They've got to believe what we tell them to believe. You can't homeschool." Well, now that Betsy DeVos is the Secretary of Education and opening up the schools, now it's the liberals who are saying we're going to keep our kids home and homeschool them. And like I keep saying, if the liberals didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. Now, this is a story that really annoys me, and it's actually a video. And this is over in Spartanburg County, and they've arrested a deputy. In fact, the deputy was arrested by the Department of Homeland Security. This is a really sick story. Apparently, this police officer was on some form of social media, and there's a warning to parents to keep an eye on strange goings-on your kids' phones. And he basically made friends with an 11-year-old girl who apparently didn't realize he was an older man. And he convinced her to send him a picture of herself nude. Then he turns around and says, if you don't send me more nude pictures, more provocative pictures, more sexual pictures, I'll show the one I've got around to all your friends. So he was basically extorting an 11-year-old girl for child pornography, which is what he's been arrested for, producing child pornography. Now, I have a question to ask. There was a study that was done down in Florida that showed police officers actually use more of these prescription antidepressants than the general population. General population, it's about 1 out of every 4, including college kids. We reported that earlier in today's show. For police, at least in this study in Florida, it's more than 1/3. And we know these medications can interfere with impulse control. You just are going to go with the impulse that first pops into your mind. Gee, she's cute. I wonder what she looks like naked. Or, maybe I should kill myself. Over at ssristories.org, there's this one case study of a kid who was perfectly okay. They declared he had ADHD, which is a fictitious disease, according to its creator. And he was put on these prescription antidepressants, and all of a sudden, he tried to commit suicide. And they intervened. They got to him in time. And when it was all over, they say, why did you try and kill yourself? And he said, I don't know. It just popped into my head, and I went with it. Now, I'm not going to make excuses for this police officer. And my sympathies go out to this 11-year-old girl who's had her innocence and youth stolen from her, and she will never get it back. But when you hear how much of this bizarre behavior is going on, you have to ask, was this guy on prescription antidepressants? We need to know. We have a right to know what's going on with these medications. Remember after Sandy Hook, and there was a citizens group in Connecticut who were trying to invoke their state's equivalent of the Freedom of Information Act to get Adam Lanza's medical records to find out what kind of medications he was on. There were all kinds of rumors that he was on antipsychotic medication, he was on antidepressants, and an attorney for the state medical examiner's office was at the meeting. Patrick Quanachet was his name. And he was on video basically saying that even if in this one case the medications contributed to what Adam Lanza supposedly did, the public doesn't need to hear that because it will discourage them from taking the medications their doctors are prescribing them. You can see where the priorities are here. First of all, it's not just that one incident. There, again, ssristories.org. This is a major ongoing problem. And if you look at Connecticut's economy, it's very heavily invested in large pharmaceutical corporations who want you to go on believing that every little tiny pill and shot that you are sold or forced to buy or forced to swallow is a blessing that could never, ever, ever cause you any harm. The United States may be drugging itself into national insanity and aberrant behavior for the sake of a fast buck. And like I said, my passion, if you will, on this subject goes back to a very bad experience I had with these medications many, many years ago. Probably almost 30 years ago now. And I went to my doctor about something completely unrelated, and I was going through the breakup of my first marriage. And my doctor said, how you doing? And I told her, well, I'm not entirely cheerful with what's going on. She said, here, you need these. And for 4 weeks, I felt great. It was fun to be with. And then I had this black depressive crash, and the only way I got through it was I just sat there saying, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, it's the chemical, and I will never, ever touch those medicines ever again. They are dangerous. And again, all those mass shooters that the gun grabbers like to wag at us as a reason for us to give up all of our guns were either on or withdrawing from those medications. Most of them. We don't know about all of them because more recently, citing the privacy rights of dead people, that information is being withheld. They don't want you to see the link. I think anybody from outside the United States looking collectively at our behavior is going to wonder if our nation is in fact going insane. If we've chemically doped our brains to where we're just behaving without restraint, whether it's going after 11-year-old girls on the cell phone, or beating up Trump supporters in the street, or breaking windows in Berkeley. Restraint of our behavior seems to be going away, and there may be a pharmacological cause for it. And it deserves to be looked at. I'm hoping that maybe after Trump's Vaccine Safety Commission and Robert Kennedy start pulling the lid off of how dangerous some of those medications are, the public's going to wake up and say, maybe some of these other things we need to be careful about. They'll stop believing those glitzy ads on TV. They'll stop trusting blindly their medical practitioners. They'll start reading the package inserts where they openly admit the DTaP vaccine causes autism. The enemy within, in this case, inside our bodies here. Now then, let's talk about Standing Rock and the Dakota Access Pipeline. The Army has given the final easement to the company that's building the pipeline to go ahead. And the situation is still very, very tense, because the reality is that the Treaty of 1851 did give that land to the Native Americans living there. That land is recognized as Sioux territory under the 1851 treaty. That treaty's never been renegotiated. The Sioux are seeing it as the U.S. government breaking another treaty, continuing a long and tragic history. And they are concerned because of all the ruptures pipelines that have been in the news lately. And when you have a ruptured pipeline, it permanently contaminates the land. It's almost impossible to get it on up. The attitude, as we saw in the Gulf oil disaster, is not clean it up, just hide it so nobody can see it. That Corexit that they poured all over the oil in the Gulf of Mexico did not make the oil go away. It just made it sink. So you could stand there on the beach and you would see water and say, oh, look at the beautiful Gulf of Mexico. I think I'll go for a swim and eat some crab for lunch. Now, apparently, according to Stripes.com, military veterans who've been supporting the Sioux in this issue are heading back to Standing Rock. And they're saying they're not going to back off on this. And here is something that we need to keep in mind. The reason the pipeline is going through the Sioux land is the original pipeline route went near a town, predominantly white, who were basically NIMBYs, which stands for not in my backyard. Oh, we don't want to risk white people getting oil contamination. We'll just ship the pipeline over here. That's not your land. And we're seeing clearly, even under President Trump, a government that does not comply with its own laws, does not feel any obligation to respect any treaty anywhere, and that's going to make it even more difficult for Trump to negotiate with other countries. If those other countries do not believe the United States government keeps its word on treaties, that's a serious impediment to any kind of a peaceful resolution of anything that's going on right now. Now, Huffington Post is back on out there pushing the vaccine sales. And having gotten laws in many states and aiming for a national one to mandate vaccines for children, now they're going after another segment of the market, adults. Really? I thought those childhood vaccines were supposed to last your entire life. Oh, no, 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 no. You've got to get vaccination every 5 or 10 years. Money, 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 money. And so Huffington Post is out there pushing vaccines mandatory. You must have them. Blah, 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 blah. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. More about this when we come on back. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, what we're seeing is the pushback against Donald Trump's Vaccine Safety Commission, which is going to be chaired by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is a vaccine critic going way, way back. He has devoted years of his life to studying this. And it's kind of interesting because when Robert F. Kennedy was on board with the environmental movement, he was lionized by the corporate media, and as soon as he started saying, I'm not sure about vaccines, oh, he's a kook, he's a nut, tinfoil hat, he's just seeking attention, he wants money, the usual stuff that we get from the corporate media here. And then yesterday we had that Pew poll that was out there saying that, 152% of Americans think children should be given mandatory vaccines to go to school, even if they're 100% healthy. And so today we have this article out of the Huffington Post saying why skipping vaccines is a public, not personal health choice. Trying to push that idea. You will accept your vaccines. We will tell you what vaccines that you will take. You will pay for them, of course, but we will tell you. And so this is the beginning of this media push to support the medical industrial complex. Vaccines are good. Vaccines are wonderful. Anybody who says vaccines are harmful is a tinfoil hat kook. Yeah, but the package insert on DTaP says it causes autism. Oh, well, whoever wrote the package insert was a kook. I mean, it's a PR campaign. It's a PR campaign. And meanwhile, we've got all these other stories out there. The CDC data proves measles vaccines kill more people than measles. There's that story we had about this Italian study showing all of these toxic metal contaminants in all of the vaccines they tested. They're putting things in the vaccines like not aspartame. Glyphosate is actually in there. Aluminum, which we know contributes to Alzheimer's. And, of course, there are the mercury-based preservatives, like thimerosal. And it's almost like, are they intending to keep us chronically ill to maximize profitability? Could be. Certainly, if you look at the autism rates, that's where it's going, because if the current growth of autism cases continues without change, by 2030, half of all American children will be diagnosed with autism, which means they're going to be unavailable to the workforce, and a significant portion of the available workforce is going to be tied up taking care of these autistic people. Glyphosate is in children's vaccines. They've confirmed mercury in vaccines does cause brain damage. And you have to wonder, what are these people thinking in this medical industrial complex? Are they deliberately causing harm to maximize profitability? Remember that doctor who got sent to prison for 45 years, spent his entire career telling perfectly healthy people they had cancer so he could sell them chemotherapy and radiation. If everybody in the United States of America was perfectly healthy, the medical industrial complex would collapse. Their business model requires us to be chronically ill, needing constant repetitive treatment of symptoms, but no cures. Because a patient cured is a patient lost. We can't allow that. We need them coming back month after month after month, checkbook in hand. That other caller was right. This lust for money is destroying the best qualities of what it used to be an American. We were altruistic. We valued quality of our work just for the sake of quality of our work. Yes, we all wanted to make money, but there was a balance among priorities. A good living, pride in what you did, pride in your work. Today we become this incredibly selfish, mercantile society. It's almost like the decade of greed, the 80s, never really ended. And it is depressing for somebody of my age to have seen the United States decline like this. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And in considering the decline of American society during my lifetime, it seems like right now we're in the grip of a subset of subhumans who have come to believe sincerely that being very, very wealthy makes them gods incarnate, and that the rest of humanity is just livestock that exist to be harvested from, one way or the other. And as long as they have this attitude, they will never feel any guilt or regret about the harm they cause. And looking at all this story we're seeing today, I keep going on back to that wonderful HBO miniseries, The Newsroom. And the premiere episode where Will McAvoy, who's played by Jeff Daniels, is at a college speaking event. And he and the rest of the panel are asked, what makes America the greatest nation on earth? And the other two just come on out with platitudes about, freedom and Walmart or whatever else it is. And when he's pressed on it, Will McAvoy says, we're not the greatest nation on earth. And he goes down that list of all the areas in which the United States really isn't doing all that well. Now, I don't know that America has ever been the greatest nation on earth. But there is no doubt that at one point in our history we were a great nation. And we have lost that. Because the greatness of a nation is not measured solely on its ability to eradicate other nations at the push of a button. The measure of a great nation is how it treats all of its population, all of its citizens, especially those most vulnerable. A great nation is measured by its infrastructure that supports commerce. A great nation has a balancing of priorities between the desire for wealth and the desire for a healthy, contented, productive population. And we have lost that. We have gone down the path to absolute fascism, which is government power and corporate greed aligned against the general population. I'd like to see us get back to being a great nation without having to punctuate it with mushroom clouds. But at this point, I have my doubts I will see it in my lifetime. We're going to go back to the phones here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing okay.
Mike, anyway, what I wanted to say is, you got it right with vaccines, except I don't think you're going far enough. I think it's a lot more insidious even than that. I'm reading a book now called Inferno. It was a movie recently, too, with Tom Hanks. I didn't see it when it was a movie. I wish I had. Also read Rainbow Six, and there's been a couple of other similar type movies and books.
Okay, can I insert a comment here? Because I read Inferno, and I have seen the movie, and the book is much better than the movie. Inferno really did not live. Yeah, it doesn't live up to the book.
Okay, I'm just getting into the really meat of the book now, where a lady meets with the with the Council of Foreign Relations, and I'm starting to put it together what it's really about. But that's okay. But like I said, I have a feeling it's kind of like Rainbow Six, and it's what they want to do, what the elitists want to do, and that's greatly reduce the world's population. And they'll do it with vaccines. They'll do it with GMO food. They'll do it with abortions. They'll do it with starvation. And they'll do it if they have, and if nothing else works, possible nuclear war. And if nothing else works, with biological warfare against the people. And that's what bothers me. And that's what makes me realize how dangerous these clowns are. And the sooner we wise up to them and we start dragging them off the streets or out of their mansions, putting them on trial, and hanging them in public, I'm afraid that they may accomplish what they're trying to do.
Well, I tend to think that the governing forces of our current events are unbridled greed and corruption mixed with accident and stupidity. But I do understand that there are people who think the Earth would be much better with the human race greatly reduced or possibly eradicated. Some of the more extreme environmentalists are saying humans are a cancer on Mother Nature and should be removed. Yeah. But, I mean, that's utterly ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. I'm a part of nature. And humans being tool-making creatures, everything we build is part of nature. This computer is part of nature. This light is part of nature. This mouse is part of nature. And I get really, really angry at these environmental wackos who think a dam built by humans to serve human need is a blight on the landscape, but a dam built by beavers to serve the beavers' purpose is part of nature. They really are both part of nature. Now, obviously, I believe in the wise use of the environment and resources, but in the extremist environmental situation, they want to just change things around amazingly. And along with Rainbow Six, another book that's really good on this and has a lot of incidental information would be A State of Fear by Michael Crichton, where in addition to the storyline about the global warming fraud and everything, there's a lot of other very well-researched information about the reality of what nature is versus this romanticized, mythical, ideal environment that's just as artificial as a golf course in the minds of these environmentalists. This idea that the Earth should never change, should never have a changing climate, everything perfectly under control. That's the artificiality right there. That's the unnatural part. And unfortunately, the environmental movement has become corrupted by money with the global warming situation, and it has perpetuated itself by developing a fanatical cult following that is rooted on belief systems rather than actual science.
See, I agree with you 100%. Only problem is that a lot of these people that believe this stuff or at least propagate this stuff are in high places. They're either very money-type people or they're in very high positions of political power.
Mm-hmm.
They're very influential. And it's like Rainbow Six. It showed these were all elitists that they basically wanted to carry out the horrors they wanted to carry out.
Yes.
And that's why I say we gotta be very careful. We've got to get to the bottom of who these people are. I have some hope now with Trump that Trump at least is doing something. He is putting a guy like RFK Jr. in there to find out about these vaccines, because we find out about the vaccines. I think we'll find out how guilty the Gates Foundation is involved in this stuff too.
Well, once they crack open, once the conspiracy of silence around the reality of the medical industrial complex cracks open with vaccines, everybody's going to start looking a little more closely. It's like when Edward Snowden began to leak out that the NSA was spying on all of us, and all of a sudden everybody started looking everywhere. Who's spying on us? The Stingray system, FBI, PRISM, and all the rest of that started to come on out. It's like the crack in the dam. Once it happens, you're not going to stop it, and it's all going to come on out.
Hey, by the way, you say that I'm reading the book. I never seen the movie. You say the book is better than the movie?
Inferno, absolutely. For one thing, they changed the ending in the movie to make it everything is all sweetness and light, and I'm not going to tell you any more because you're not all the way through the book.
Okay, don't tell me any more. I want to know.
But
where it looks in the book, it looks to me like this is basically Rainbow Six.
Look, I'm going to let you finish the book here. But unlike Dan Brown's earlier books, The Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons, where the movie was a faithful representation of it and enjoyable, Inferno was a bit of a disappointment.
It was? Okay.
Okay.
Well, all right, I appreciate you telling me that. So, but the movie isn't even worth it at all then, huh?
Well, we did watch it because it was Tom Hanks and it was Dan Brown, and I had read the book. But it was a bit of a letdown.
I mean, you don't think the book was that good either?
No, the book was great. I think the book is great. That's why I'm disappointed in the movie.
Okay.
Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go. We're going to let you go here because I'm running out of time and I got a bunch of stuff I need to cover, including human-caused global warming. Insert ominous music here. Here's a very, very bizarre story. This is out of the Daily Mail, where they're talking about the weather here in the United States. There's another major snowstorm coming in to New England. It's going to be a very, very heavy one. And what's really interesting is they're making the point that in between the snow and ice, we're getting these record high temperatures just hours before the snow came on down. And what's going on here is the corporate media is not able to convince you not to look at the snow and ice any longer. So now the new strategy is they're going to tell you that there's record high heat from human-caused global warming and it's hiding in between the snowflakes. That's how ridiculous this thing is getting. Now, as you know, we are past the point in time where Al Gore predicted a climate apocalypse was going to happen. But since he's got his sequel movie coming on out and nobody's going to see it, he's trying to come on out and say, actually, it did happen, you just couldn't tell. You weren't paying attention when his prognostications came to pass. Classic political situation here. And the reason they're back to pushing human-caused global warming while we are in the middle of yet another record-setting winter is because now some prominent Republicans have hopped on board the liberal global warming agenda, and they're pushing for a carbon tax. And I told you, once the election was over, they were going to push for a carbon tax. I thought Obama was going to do it, but they're still out there because they're desperate for more of your money. And the only way they can get it is to say, it's your fault the planet is dying, and you will atone by giving us your money. Now then, there is a highly respected, medal-winning climate scientist, and his name is John Bates, and he had previously been a star of the global warming cult, and he's just thrown a major monkey wrench into the global warming agenda because he is calling attention to the fact, and we reported this earlier, the climate report put out by the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, and people are already sending in alternative names for that, that claimed there was no pause in global warming was junk. And it was time to basically scare the nations at the climate summit in Paris into pouring more money into human-caused global warming. And Bates has come on out, blowing the whistle, saying the NOAA study was cooked on several counts. And he said it was such a mess, no self-respecting scientist would ever sign their name to it. But scientists did sign on to it in exchange for generous funding to prove humans are warming the planet. Journal Science published it, and they were just playing ball and going along with the globalist plan, because the push for a one-world government, new world order rests on three pillars. The first one is human-caused global warming, requiring our surrendering our sovereignty to a global environmental authority that will tell us all how to live more poorly so that the rich can have more. The second pillar was a global pandemic that would require a global health authority to manage. They tried that back in 2009 with the when pigs fly flu that didn't really get off the ground. Turned out to be less severe than the normal seasonal flu. And the third pillar, of course, is a global economic crash, which does appear to be in the immediate offing. That last one, though, is problematic because everybody now understands it's private central banking that has caused this economic disaster in the making, and suggesting to cure it with another global private central bank is not going to be something people are going to go along with. That's like saying, let's back the Titanic up, whack the other side of the bow with the iceberg, and hope that that stops the leaks. Not likely to work. And that's part of Soros' whole idea to convince you we must have a global government to save planet Earth from all you icky-poo human beings. Meanwhile, there is a real threat out there that nobody wants to talk about because they can't solve it, and even worse, they can't make money off of it. And that, of course, is what's going on at Fukushima. And yes, I'm back to taking daily radiation readings, and they are as high as the worst of what we encountered after the actual disaster. And we're seeing an article that's come on out here from IntelliHub basically saying that the entire northern hemisphere is going to be exposed to this new surge in radiation that is blowing out of the Fukushima reactor, the ruins of it. And they're talking about levels of radiation that could literally kill you upon immediate exposure. It also makes it a lot more difficult they're trying to come up with some kind of robots that can go into the ruins of the reactors and try and do repairs or cleanup or even just look and see what's going on in there. And the radiation is so intense, it's frying the chips inside the robots before they can really get in there. Maybe a time to resurrect the idea of discrete component electronic assembly. But even then, there is no solution. There is no solution for this. But they're not going to make a big deal about it because they can't fix it. See, with human-caused global warming, they can take your money and take your freedom, and then a few years down the road say, we solved the problem. With Fukushima, even if they take your money and your freedom, they can't come back a few years and say, we solved the problem, because the problem's still going to be there. So they can't make money off of it, they can't solve it, therefore it's not important. Politicians and the media are only interested in those events that can be monetized or used to political gain. And Fukushima is a disaster in anybody's book. Not just health-wise, engineering-wise, it's a political disaster. For Japan, for TEPCO, for General Electric. And we should be paying much more attention to that. I need to get hold of a new radiation meter that reads alpha particles, because these only do beta and gamma. Now then, a very alarming story. Apparently, the incoming president of Ecuador is saying that he is going to end Julian Assange's asylum. And we don't know what's going to happen to him at that point, whether he will be able to flee to some other embassy who will give him sanctuary. But that is a very, very alarming development. Now, technically, Assange is... well, we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here now. Julian Assange may be losing his asylum status with Ecuador. Hopefully somebody else will step on in. You need to remember, at this point, the only actual crime Assange is accused of was a sexual assault. And as it turns out, the woman who was reported to be the victim has gone public saying that none of this stuff ever happened, that the police were coercing her into filing this report so they could get Assange for exposing all this stuff in WikiLeaks. So we'll see what happens with that, and we certainly hope for the best for him. Down in Australia, they have been looking at the problem of child sexual abuse, and they are finding, to nobody's surprise, that there is a big problem among the Catholic priests. And according to the reports they released first of this week, 7% of Catholic priests who worked in Australia between 1950 and 1975 were accused of sexually abusing children. 78% of the victims were male, 22% were female, with the average age at the time of abuse 10.5 for girls, 11.5 for boys. So it's still a problem out there. Now then, probably a lot of you are very concerned over the recent tendency for companies to sell you products and then act like you don't really own them. That there are licensing restrictions, you may not resell, you may not do this, you may not do that, you may not peek inside to see the software and find out if we're spying on you, like they just found out with this TV set was collecting your viewing information and selling it to marketers. So Representative Blake Farenthold, Republican of Texas, and Jared Polis, Democrat of Colorado, have just reintroduced their You Own Devices Act, or YODA for short, which, if passed, will allow ordinary people to reclaim ownership rights in the software-enabled devices you buy. They're going to start pulling on back and saying, yeah, if you own it, you own it. And the company doesn't have a right to come on in and say, you're not allowed to peek inside to see if we're spying on you. Because it does get a little ridiculous and over the top. Anyway, we're coming up here on the end of the show. Somebody else just sent me this other article from the Daily Mail about how world leaders were duped into investing billions over this manipulated global warming data from NOAA. At this point, just like Thomas Jefferson said, even the truth should be distrusted if it appears in a newspaper. At this point, I think the prudent course of action for everybody on planet Earth is to just distrust anything coming from the U.S. government and its agencies. Just presume it's a lie or a hoax and let them prove it to you that this is reality, or that is the law, or this is this, or that is that. That's the safest course of action. How do you know when a politician is lying? Their mouth moves and words pour forth. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, stay skeptical. Keep yourself fully informed, make good choices, share what you know with everybody that you know. Thanks for spending some time with us today, and we'll be back. Aloha, America.